Okay, we're off. So once again, CRIN, thanks for putting together another great panel, bringing together some real leaders in collaboration and clean technology development in Canada. This is quite the group that's joined us here this afternoon. It's going to be a fairly high-level and expansive set of questions. Get lots of insights from each of these guys and the organizations that they're involved in, and the role that they play in clean technology development, and the importance of that to reducing emissions in Canada. So let's start with going through a round of introductions. And conveniently, they didn't organize themselves as per the image, but what I'm going to ask is I'll go through and say who you are and your titles, but then we'll just pass the mic down. I guess since Kevin, you've got the mic, we'll kick it off with you. So what I'd like you to do is just talk a little bit, introduce yourself, your background, and your organization, and how it fits into Canada's clean tech and the energy emission reduction ecosystem that we have in Canada. So we've got Kevin Krauser, CEO and co-founder of Avatar Innovations. Well, next up is Jackson Hegland, President and CEO of Modern West. Then we've got Sohail, President and CEO of PTAC, as well as a few other organizations that you're involved in as well. Scott Volk, Director of Emissions and Innovation at Tourmaline. And then we've got John Adams, who's President and CEO of NGIF Ventures. So, and I'm Tim Shaw, I'm with Tourmaline as well. Okay, Kevin, let's kick it off with you. A little bit of background and how you fit into the clean tech space here.
I'm trying to think of actually a background that maybe not everyone in the room knows. Maybe actually one piece of the background is actually despite the fact that my career has been in the drilling industry, my research background is in research neurosciences. And when I was working on the drilling rigs, I was actually brought into the office to negotiate the rollout of the rig technician program. That was when we had 800 rigs working. I had been working on the rigs for 4 years, and that was when there was 800 rigs working. You'd have and the government of Alberta then mandated that to work on a drilling rig, you had to complete 16 weeks of training at a polytechnic, a NAIT, SAIT, Red Deer College, etc. And they didn't grandfather the rig hands, and it was sort of wildly rejected and wildly controversial in the sense you'd had professionals working in the industry for decades, really resenting the fact that there was some implication that it needed to now be, go to school to learn their job. And really actually happy with the advancements and the changes that did. But combining my background in sort of research behavioral learning models and the drilling industry was actually really where I thought about, how to bring the tenets of behavioral-based learning to new technologies, which was really sort of the nucleus of what Avatar was, that I don't think you can do technology without culture, because culture will eat strategy for breakfast like every day of the week. And if you don't empower people with new technologies, they will do everything they can to make sure it doesn't work. And so when you're working on new technologies, you need to really figure out about ways to empower people in the process. So that's a long and I think maybe new or interesting fact about how I approach technology, which is a sort of very people-first approach to new technologies. So yeah, that's me. Jackson, tell us something about it yourselves we don't all know.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I've known this guy since he was born, actually. So we could start with that. I don't have a whole hell of a lot of stories of you growing up, though, because we lost touch with each other for about 35 years and then came back together through the work that we're doing. But so I'm involved with several organizations. The primary is Modern West Advisory, Carbon Connect International. I'm co-founder with that organization. We administer programs in Alberta with the TIER funds, and executive director with the Methane Emissions Leadership Alliance, which is about 40 clean tech providers in the methane space specifically. I'll tell you a little bit more about my background. I tried to design a carbon market for Canada's upstream oil and gas industry in the late 90s. I think I had one journal to work off of, and the rest was up to my creative mind. So no, nobody is allowed to read my thesis because it's absolutely horrible. But it was the foundation really for me getting involved in this space, that I've been keen on carbon markets and carbon pricing since university in the 90s. So translated that later into a 9-year career with ARC Resources. And Kendall, I look at you here because you're on the oil sands side, and between all the work that I do, I nothing in the oil sands because it's very methane centric. But I did, when I was at ARC and I got to design the carbon program and the corporate sustainability initiative from the ground up for the 9 years I was there. There's one organization one part of our organization I never talked to, which was geology. So today I just kind of reflect on it, mostly to draw you into the conversation here at some point. But I was basically an internal salesman, essentially, having to educate people on carbon, educate on what impact it had to their work on a day-to-day, and then ultimately how do we evaluate technologies and get them out into our field. And dealing with the guys in the field obviously is the best part of the business. So that's a little bit on my background now, and just mostly focused on the Modern West side, of course, which is an integrated decarbonization, GHG accounting, and corporate ESG firm. So looking forward to the rest of this discussion with these guys. Do a lot of work with all three of these guys, I would say, with Sohail on the methane side and with these guys on the ETC in particular. So pretty happy to be here, and we're sponsors with you guys. So it's good stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Sohail Askarpour, I guess Tim mentioned. I started with research and development, and I'm back where I was, but in a completely different role. So my PhD was on solar energy, couldn't find a job, so worked for Gulf Corporation in the US in the research center. And then they transferred me to Canada, and I became an executive here with Gulf. And then I have been working on numerous areas. I mean, I worked for government of Alberta as their business leader in charge of approval of all of the oil sands projects, collecting royalties, land sale, and all of the strategic decisions. And for past 16 years, I have been president and now CEO of Petroleum Technology Alliance Canada. So related to this discussion that we have, I have, for example, was president of the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum. 14 societies were kind of under CIM banner. So that's like a collaboration among 14 diversified areas that, they don't have that many things in common. Also, I was the chairman of the Petroleum Society and served on photonics as a director, and served on CRIN as a director. And currently I'm president of the Canadian Academy of Engineering, and I serve on the Council of Canadian Academies as a director. So yes, I have been working with all you gentlemen, and again, with respect to PTAC, I would say PTAC as a first name and a last name. First name is innovation, last name is collaboration.
Thanks, Sohail. So my name is Scott Volk. I'm the Director of Emissions and Innovation at Tourmaline, and I'll kind of talk about the context in why Tourmaline thinks that this is important and why innovation is important to Tourmaline. We're Canada's largest natural gas producer. We've been there for a little while, and we're really interested and really concerned about making sure that we do things in the right way and reduce our emissions. We do a lot of work on not just saying we're doing it, but doing real action. So Tourmaline's always been grounded in action. So the things that we like to do are things like waste heat recovery and methane mitigation. We run the Natural Gas Innovation Fund Emissions Testing Center. And then we got to the point where it's not just good enough to kind of talk about the things you're doing. We also got to where you need to prove it. So then we started doing a fair amount of work in responsibly sourced gas. We work on certified gas. We've actually worked with Modern West to do life cycle assessments on a number of our different gas plants as well. so that we can now we can prove that we're also doing the things we said we're going to do, and we are drastically reducing our emissions. So it's always been critically important for Tourmaline to be a responsible producer and to help have natural gas be a real solution for reducing emissions and for climate change. As far as other extra things, I have a lot of hobbies, maybe no life. So I'm I'm on the steering committee of CRIN. I'm on the CARIN steering committee. I'm on the BC Methane Emissions Research Collaborative, vice chair of the PTERC's OPERF group as well, and then on the Emissions Testing Center and the NGF World, we participate in all the different parts of the Natural Gas Innovation Fund. So I'm on the Grants and the Grants Innovations Committee. We are the operator of the Emissions Testing Center, so we do a lot of work on that space and operate the Emissions Testing Center. And then I'm on the Innovation on the Ventures piece as well. So yeah, lots of different things in this space, and super interested to get into talking about how we all need to collaborate and how we all need to work along and how all those different groups and different hobbies all kind of fit together.
Such hard acts to follow. So my name's John Adams. I'm the president and CEO of NGF Capital. That organization runs a clean tech venture fund for natural gas. I'm the president and CEO of our nonprofit called NGF Accelerator. That accelerator runs the programs that Scott just mentioned. We have an industry grants program, and we have an emissions testing center program. I'm also on the board of directors for CRIN. I'm on the board of directors of a publicly traded company, Tidewater Renewables, and of course with a venture fund, I sit on several boards of our startups. My background, so I'm not from the energy space. I came to the energy space about 10 years ago through the Canadian Gas Association. Before that, I worked for a big Japanese company, Mitsui. There I was partly in sort of the later part of that career looking at and scouting for clean tech companies to be acquired by Mitsui. They wanted access to Canada. Then from there I went to STTC. I'm not sure if that's a great name right now to publicize. I was in the 1.0 STTC with the former CEO, but great place to also learn about clean tech. So my background is clean tech finance and startup world, and when I came to the Canadian Gas Association, which is where NGF was born, the deal was I'll bring clean tech and startups and entrepreneur to the gas industry that was back then is this board here. And so Tim, thanks for inviting me on the panel.
Great. Yeah, thanks to that, everyone. So you guys just told some great stories about your backgrounds, how you're involved in industry, the role you have in technology development, some of the experiences you had and the challenges you faced. As an industry, oil and gas has never really done a great job telling its story. And so I think as a result of that, it's really not known well how much technology and innovation is used in the industry. So maybe could you guys just talk a little bit about some of the technology and innovation that you think should be out there, should be known, and the role that it has in reducing emissions?
I could probably start with that since I've got the mic. So when the Natural Gas Innovation Fund was born back about 7 or 8 years ago, when I was speaking to the Canadian Gas Association, one of the aspects I wanted to bring was the utilities and the producers do a really good job at speaking about the work. They run world-class organizations and operations. What I wanted to do was bring a different voice to our sector. And so 10 years ago, when we started to do this, I wanted to bring the startup and the clean tech voice to come in and say, look, we are building and predicating our companies on the long-term work of the natural gas sector. We're building companies that are reducing methane emissions. We're building companies that will reduce water and production of gas. And so those companies will now be a new voice in the industry, and they will speak about the great work that our industry does. And so that's how we brought in the world of clean tech and startups and that community to build on the voice that the industry already has.
Okay, there's definitely not one technology that we can kind of talk about that the industry is using in order to reduce emissions. But maybe I'll talk about a few different initiatives that Tourmaline has and how we use those different technologies and what the big ones are. So some of the things we focus on diesel displacement or high carbon fuel displacement. So that's been an initiative for Tourmaline for some years. We've displaced millions of liters of diesel fuel. In order to do that, we've had to design and create a whole bunch of different types of technology. Some are really simple. The simple ones would be things like getting natural gas to site to displace diesel fuel with, having a scrubber and a system there to make it suited for an engine. And then some are significantly more complex. ERA was here. We applied for an ERA grant with Caterpillar and Precision Drilling and designed a hybrid drilling rig where we're running a battery-powered drilling rig that's taking natural gas engines and creating electricity in a 1 megawatt battery pack, and it's almost like a Prius hybrid type of solution where you're drastically reducing the amount of emissions and drastically reducing the amount of fuel that's run. One of the other key initiatives for us are methane mitigation. We believe methane is one of the best ways to reduce emissions quickly. So in the methane space, we've got the emissions testing center, and we're doing incredible things. And I think that's a little bit missed as well as to how meaningful that is and how big those emissions reductions have been. So in Canada now, we've got satellites that were launched directly out of Canada. So GHGSat has satellites in space. We've got aircraft that can measure methane down to about a barbecue on lit type of thing. So that's pretty incredible. We've got continuous monitors that measure down to the parts per billion. They can essentially see one tiny little bit of methane across a space, and we're using those technologies to really figure out where our emissions are coming from and making sure they're being fixed. There's drones and fixed wing aircraft and truck mount and little robot dogs now that can walk around the site and look for things. So the technology and innovation happening in Canada is pretty incredible, and we're proud to be a part of it, and look forward to trying to tell that story to the rest of the world and share a lot of learnings, especially on the methane space where we have had methane regulations for a very long time and have had very ambitious regulations, and that's driven a lot of innovation and a lot of creativity in the Canadian space that I think could be shared with the world.
Thanks. So I guess I started my kind of research and development back when I was working on my PhD. So I came with this technology to store solar energy. So during day you would collect it or store it, and then at night you would utilize it. I was actually doing a search on some of the patent that I had, etc., and I noticed there was a patent that they just used my paper as reference and nothing else. And somebody made a company, and they are very profitable in Quebec and making money. Back then I only cared about publishing and not perishing. So moving forward, I guess was involved with numerous research and development organizations in Canada. And then I joined PTAC, as I mentioned, 16 years ago. Maybe I should talk about PTAC and all of the research and development that we have done. Essentially, our job at PTAC is focusing on 5 areas. The first one is environmental management. And that by itself is divided into 5 sub-areas: clean air, water, remediation and reclamation, well closure, and ecology and biodiversity. And we have done over 530 applied research projects. The outcome of it is essentially the producers would use best practices to not only reduce their environmental footprint, but do it in a cost-effective manner. And then, of course, the regulatory bodies and policymakers, they use the information because it's peer-reviewed, done by professors, for development of smart policies and regulations. So that program itself has a unique model for collaboration. 400 producers provide funds to that program. The regulatory bodies, the policymakers, producers, researchers, technology providers are all part of that innovation ecosystem. When we move to other areas, so that was the first area. The second area is reducing cost, finding technologies that we can reduce both operating and capital cost. And the third area is about value-added opportunities, converting bitumen to value-added opportunities, converting oil to value-added opportunities. The fourth area is about increasing reserves and production rate through numerous technologies. And the fifth area is about working toward low carbon economy. So if you have time till midnight or maybe tomorrow morning, I can maybe go over some of these projects. I'm going to be very brief in terms of some examples. On the drilling, for example, and completion, we worked with the Schlumberger and also another company for essentially drilling these multilateral legs and then making sure that we would be able to manage it when the pressure is extremely high, and that would be for tight oil and shale gas, or very high temperature, like for SAGD, etc. And so that technology was developed and is being used. We have developed 89 technologies to reduce methane emissions that played a fundamental role in the actual 45% methane reduction in Canada. And many of these technologies, we are exporting it to many jurisdictions. And these are essentially technologies done that we helped small and medium-sized companies with their field testing, with respect to development and commercialization, etc. On reserves add and reserves add, I think we have looked at the numerous technologies post SAGD, for example, using non-condensing gas as the way of increasing recovery factor, using hot water and other non-condensing gas for heavy oil projects. We have looked at enhanced oil recovery and numerous other technologies. I would say the value-added opportunities, actually we launched a project to see how we can increase value from bitumen. So this project was that, if, as you know, if we add propane to bitumen, immediately the asphaltene would drop out. And then so the question is, what do you do with all of this asphaltene that now you have? How do you find markets? So we did a global search for finding technologies, and actually the BBC that John Zaw and Alberto Innovate's work was one of the technology among many technologies identified to see how we can convert oil and bitumen to value added at almost zero emissions. So I think that's probably enough for you guys. So I'm going to pass it to Jackson.
Well, hey, I'm going to actually jump in there because a couple of things I think lead up to a good question here for Jackson. You mentioned the methane emission reductions and hitting that 45% target. Alberta just announced it achieved that ahead of schedule. Canada's on track to achieve theirs. I think, Jackson, this is right in your wheelhouse. What is helping industry get there? So what's driving those emission reductions? What's working really well for us?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So first, I'll circle back to the initial question, then I'll address that one, is we have an emissions problem. And so the best technology is the one that's going to reduce the most emissions for the least amount of cost. And so we're very fortunate in Canada to have this segue now into the second question is we've had an ecosystem that has enabled the development and deployment of a lot of these technologies, and finding the lowest cost ones takes the ETC, and it takes going through an innovation process, and hopefully Kevin will be able to talk a little bit more about how we break the innovation mold to ensure that we're enabling the the highest emission reduction technologies at the lowest cost into the system in the most efficient manner that we can. But we've had regulations, we've had carbon pricing, we've had government funding initiatives, we've had industry ambition, we've had stakeholders that have been pushing the sector to achieve certain outcomes. And so we've had this system in place in Canada for probably longer than anywhere in the world. Certainly when I'm traveling around the world to have conversations around methane, we get a lot of interest because we have a comprehensive system and we understand what works in a regulation, what doesn't work. None of it's perfect, of course. Our ecosystem is not perfect, but it's extensive. And we can certainly say that it's the most extensive in the world, while there are many imperfections along the way. But it has enabled all of us to be here and be able to talk about which clean techs are coming through the system and then how we get them out into the system a little bit more. So, Tim, really it's this comprehensive system we've had since about 2007, for the most part, in Alberta in particular, which includes the carbon markets, which includes policy signals, it includes regulations that are changing. Now, we'd love to see a little more consistency in that. We'd love to see the offset program maintain its consistency over time. We need that for the investments because we're running on 30-plus year investments, and whereas we're otherwise running on shorter timelines from the policy scenario and regulatory side. We'll see how the methane regs from the federal perspective shake out later tonight. And we'll see how the innovation system, many of these folks here, responds. And I'm very hopeful that we are able to mobilize capital in each of the locations it needs to be. It needs to be an innovation in R&D, but it needs to be on deployment. And if there's conversation around getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies, there needs to be an equivalent investment into decarbonization and technologies. There needs to be an equilibrium there. And hopefully, it's some messaging that we hear out, if you're able to hit some other panels, there's some optimism that we'll get there. But deploying capital at pace is going to be really important.
So on that, I'd like to pass it to Kevin. We'll broaden it beyond methane, but what's working well? How's that capital being deployed? We'll hit you up and then we'll pass it over to John on that one.
Yeah, so I actually want to backtrack on the last question because I think it was an interesting one to set up what we need to do from an innovation problem. We keep thinking it's a storytelling problem, but it's actually a vision and a mission problem. We've been telling our story since ever, no one's listening. And so when you cast a vision or a mission that includes people and inspires people to be larger than they are, then people listen, and then you have a story to tell. Take Pathways, for example. That is a story that is captivating. We're going to use Canada's oil wealth to drive the largest investment in carbon capture in the world. And we're going to use that to build CO2-constrained industries in the way that, civilizations used to congregate around water and other resources. Now we can do it with CO2 sequestrations for other heavy industry. That's a vision you can cast. Oxy, look at them. And the amazing thing is Oxy's then, cash flow to enterprise value is in a different parallel than others. And they're keeping core to their core business, but they're casting this vision of sort of where we're going. That's the piece that's missing. And so the challenge is we're an industry of engineers, and so we say, facts, and we need to educate them, but it's not working, right? And so it's a vision and a mission problem, and I just do want to give Pathways a kudos for, I think, casting that type of vision. In terms of what we actually need to do to get these technologies to market, because yes, so Startup Genome just released, which is like a international startup, like Silicon Valley metric system, just did an evaluation. I actually put Calgary as one of the sort of top hubs, but and mentioned the Energy Transition Center as one of the contributing factors to why Calgary, I think, is ranked 13th in the world as a clean tech hub. But the part that didn't make the headlines in that report was that while we scored basically top of class on ecosystem support, we scored very low in terms of access to capital, in terms of access to experienced entrepreneurs. And that's the piece of the puzzle that we really need to start thinking about. And so we keep going back to this challenging statement of some smart technology that has to be able to get across the line, going to an operator and saying, okay, well, you give us a pilot location, and then the operator saying, okay, well, everybody feels like they're taking on too much risk. And in the process, and you get this slow bleed out where 72% of clean tech startups fail because they run out of capital. What I think is actually necessarily needed is potentially a slightly different new commercialization model, in the sense that if getting something to a pilot, we keep thinking we're going to scale that like we scaled Uber. But the problem is you can't. What we need to do is demonstrate to companies like the Schlumbergers, like the Hitachis of the world, that here's a proven pilot that's gotten to a certain point, and then instead of doing a Series B to Z raise, flip it at some sort of multiple valuation, because the VC community is reeling in this new inflationary world. Why are you going to invest in VC when you can go and get a debt bond for 10% yield? That's the piece of the puzzle that my mind is going to, and I haven't quite cracked it, but I think that's what our conversation was, at least last night, is how do you get past the pilot? And it might not look like Uber. It might look more like Schlumberger or SLB. Sorry, I keep getting that one wrong.
So I like this thread. We'll keep pulling on this, and we'll keep working our way back down. I do want to talk about deployment of capital. I think that's really...
You want me to comment?
Well, it's okay. We can work our way down. I also want to have you guys comment on what it takes to get that technology across the line into market. And Jackson, it sounds like you've had some experience trying to work with the field to get that deployed. Maybe we'll flip it to you, and we'll keep working down if you guys have stories. I think there's ETC that has a role in this response as well, but we'll start with you, Jackson.
Well, I think that's why, Tim, is so important to have people at the table to talk this through, is how do we efficiently get the capital in the market, and how do we get the technologies to go quickly from ideation to pilot to broad deployment. And because there's we need private and public capital. We need them to work together. We can't have the public capital be really difficult to access, because the private capital can only go so far in many cases, and you've got significantly different barriers on the public funds. And so how do we is essentially, the blended capital discussion around climate is how do we enable that as a system? I think that's still something that we're working on in Canada, because there is a bit of disparity right now, and we need more of it into the system. So I want to address that piece, and while I did it, what just happened is similar to what happened. I'm going to address this now, fellas, okay? So on the way over here, I'd left my bag in Toronto. Okay, so
I was told not to ask about that. But.
So I've since had to replace all my clothes, and it really impacted my first 2 days here. Thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that, you guys.
It's a good thing it happened.
Yeah.
I mean, you've looked the same for the last 3 days, but that's okay.
So the point is,
yeah.
I forgot your second question. Segue there.
Well, we were talking about one was deployment of capital, the other one was what it takes to get these technologies across the line through the pilots.
So one of my favorite things about innovation in the oil and gas sector that I've experienced to date is that you have a lot of new ideas, and you got a lot of new companies that are coming through, certainly on the detection side. But you also have organizations that have been around for 20, 30 years. They've been providing technology and services to the sector for years, but they continue to innovate. And they're the ones that are still pretending to be in their garage, except they're in a big office space in Nisku, and they're still innovating new ideas as the system, the regulations and the funding initiatives and the industry's ambition continues to evolve. It's really neat to see when you go into some of these organizations that have been around, but now they've got a new technology, so they understand sort of how to navigate the system. When Modern West started, actually, our first set of clients were clean tech providers, because they said, hey, listen, you understand how to get through the internal barriers, which I know is something that you talk about all the time, Kev, is how do you get through the internal barriers at an organization in order to enable technology into the field. And it's important to understand who to talk to and how to position yourself. There's not every organization has a Scott Volk that you can just go to Scott and that's right, and then he figures it out. Not every organization is built like that. So I wish more were, for sure, but we can't replicate you.
We need more technology and innovation, then we'll get there. We'll be able to replicate them. Yeah.
So the small and medium-sized enterprise, they badly need funds to field test their technologies. They badly need money to increase their market uptake of their technologies. And there are different ways, different model. One is that you go to a venture capital and you say, give me some money. But the problem with that model is that usually the venture capital would say, you know what, give me a big chunk of your company to me. Or they would say, you know what, this is going to cost you this much later on, etc. When they come to us, we don't use that model. At no cost to them, we field test their technologies. We have actually access to over $1 billion facilities that with the money that we have secured from federal and provincial governments, we field test their technologies. And then that has been essentially solving the value of debt problem for them. But then, we noticed that even after we provide them with that support, still SMEs are struggling because they need to increase their market uptake of their technologies. And that is not easy because the organizations that they have been engaged through field testing, they would adopt those technologies. But now we have in Alberta over 450 producers. So those guys are not aware. And so we actually came up with this idea of we provide 75% cost of installation and equipment for those producers that they have no knowledge of that technology to use those technologies, and then once they see the benefit, they would go buy them in a large volume. And with methane, that works because with methane, it's very small cost for example, getting your pneumatics or different equipments. So it's not a huge one, but there are zillions of them out there. So you give them just a really good experience with few of them, and once they see the benefit, then they go buy them in a large volume. So that model has worked. The benefit of it is the SMEs would keep their IP ownership. The benefit is that they don't end up essentially giving up everything to venture capitals, etc.
Okay, well, we've got a panel full of incubators here, so I'm going to take it in a different kind of path and talk a little bit about policy, which is kind of interesting. And I do need to. I'm going to use this because it's the best example that I've seen that has had the largest amounts of outcomes that I've ever seen. The Alberta government put a price on carbon back in, I think, around 2007. And a price on carbon drives some innovation and it drives things in the ecosystem. But when they set a really aggressive target on methane, they did something even beyond that. They had a price on carbon, but then they had a value on emissions reductions, and they built that value on emissions reductions in the form of a compliance offset to the methane space, and that compliance offset gave a value and a pretty significant value for reducing methane emissions. And once they put a price out or like a target on the head of methane and made it that valuable, you had a whole ecosystem of innovators, you had a whole ecosystem of producers, you had a whole ecosystem of everyone really looking to solve that problem and really looking to create some value from getting those offsets. And I've never seen change like that, where we went from we really didn't have the technology to meet the 45% target that Alberta had set, to all of a sudden we've got all these companies that started up out of the woodwork, and they took real risks to do that, and they did that because they saw a real target that was there, and they saw a real value in it, and they saw a way to monetize it. And I think we need to do that more often if we're going to hit any of our targets. We need to really be focused on achieving the outcomes that we're looking to achieve, and put a value on the behaviors we're looking for people to have. It made incredible progress in the space. It drove a whole bunch of different technologies and incubators, and now we've got Canadian companies with real solutions that are going and solving world problems, and we got ahead of the game, and now we're selling products into the US and around the world as well, because we really did take a jump on methane. I wouldn't say we're ahead on everything by any means, but that really did drive some innovation in the methane space. And I guess kudos to the Alberta government for that program.
So we'll jump back to the policy regulatory piece in a second. I do want to give John a chance to talk about capital deployment and how NGIF is helping enable technologies.
So as background on the technology and innovation funding organization we have 100 projects and 85 startups across Western Canada, de-risking technologies from TRL 4 to 7. And we have about 30 or so startups at Tourmaline's Perpetual's site, de-risking technologies. And we have 11 startups in our venture fund that are now scaling. And so not all venture guys are bad. As I run our venture fund, so here's some good things about scaling companies with the venture fund. First of all, our venture fund has 8 limited partners. Tourmaline's one of them. When startups here who have in the energy space, who have a solution to lower methane emissions, lower CO2 carbon intensity, and they hear that we have 8 potential customers that they can access by an investment through our fund, that's big news. So we can get an investment, and so we don't take more than we have I'll be very transparent, from like 1%, if it's a like sort of later stage investment, to about like 14%. To a sort of a new startup that's sort of coming out of the avatar stage, which is with the ideation, where Kevin creates all these companies, and so we steer them into the direction of natural gas. We keep them, and that's why so as we all know here, many of the startups can go to many applications. A clean tech startup, while we like them pointed to natural gas to lower the carbon intensity, of course, many of them can go to the aerospace sector, the mining sector, many sectors. And in fact, we like that because then they grow. They grow as a startup, and startups need to grow and thrive. So the important component that we try to add with our venture fund is also with 8 customers, we help, and our team helps build those relationships, access the Scott, access the other 8 limited partners Scots, so that the startup has a meaningful head start to scale their company and valuations go up. I'll give you an example. It's not a methane emissions, but we have a carbon capture technology called Ionata. And Ionata was the beneficiary of an industry grant from our program, maybe even through CRIN. CRIN also gave them a grant, and Modern West has done the calculations on their technology. Tourmaline was one of the participants in the grant that supported them. Ionata went on and then received an investment from us. So again, Modern West did the calculations. Tourmaline's part of the investor of the investment. Just recently, and so we helped Ionata go on. Ionata just went on to do a Series A with Archrock, now did a lead investment. Archrock is a large natural gas services company. So we have kept Ionata in the value chain of natural gas from the production, transmission, and distribution, now to a services company. And so they're going to go on and scale and grow into the natural gas sector. And so that's part of the meaningful way NGIF and our clean tech venture side scales companies to get into where we want them to be, which is doing the hard work and heavy lifting on emissions reduction, if that's helpful.
Excellent. Okay, I wanted to come back to the policy and regulation piece, and there've been a couple of comments about we've got a solid regulatory system that's driving a lot of progress and some really great results, and also we've got a lot of innovation that's developing the technologies. So what's the balance here? Is it the chicken and egg? Like, which one do we need to focus on, and what should we be prioritizing?
I don't know. I would say both are critically important. We want to make sure we have strong policy and strong things that are convincing us we need to go do it. So whether that be the cost on carbon or a value on emissions reductions, we do need some amount of policy to make sure that we have that drive to go where we want. It does need to be smart policy. Like if you're in a situation where it's going to cause a whole lot of carbon leakage, pushing capital out of Canada and pushing emissions into other countries is not going to solve any issues. And then you also need to make sure that you're not pushing to where you're going to try to have people divest emissions, because you really do need people to take ownership of their own emissions and reduce them. You want oil and gas companies to be significantly better oil and gas companies. If you just say, okay, they divest out, then someone else is going to make the product, someone else is going to cause the emissions, and the emissions didn't go away. You need people to own the emissions and really work hard on reducing them. And then to do that, we need the second part of the story. So we need those technologies so that you can own your emissions and you can look yourself in the eye and say, this is something I really need to work on improving, and this is how we're going to go about doing it. So you need all those different technologies as well. So I think policy is really important. It just needs to be really thoughtful, and carbon leakage is incredibly important in thoughtful policy.
So I would say the key is collaboration. I had the pleasure and opportunity to work with the regulatory body in Alberta and the policymakers when they were trying to come up with their regulations and policies. So when you look at what is behind collaboration, essentially, is that you gotta have a common vision, and you start with that common vision, and then you move to making sure that you are aligned in terms of your goals. So how we need to work is to really work very closely in a collaborative manner with the regulatory bodies, with the policymakers, making sure the technology providers' voices heard, making sure producers' voices heard, making sure that we are doing it collectively. The public definitely has a saying in the whole thing. So we gotta get all of them engaged. It's not simple because now that we may have different goals, but we always can work together in terms of collaboration to find that really great spot where everybody is aligned and everybody can agree with, and that would move things forward. Alberta, Canada, I think we are blessed with really many provinces and in terms of their regulations and policies and their willingness to listen. So I think, again, I go back to the word collaboration, that we need to collaborate to come up with smart policies, smart regulations. They should be based on facts, not based on emotion. We do 530 applied research to actually find scientific facts and also do evidence-based information by doing applied research to come up with the facts. And those facts becomes foundations for policies and regulations.
So I think the initial question, Tim, was around sort of, what do we need for drivers to enable technology? To me personally, climate is the driver. And climate drives government, and climate drives industry ambition, climate drives stakeholder ambition. So to me, the answer actually is climate. But we do need all the other pieces to be aligned with, frankly, the urgency of what we're faced with around our climate issue. So I would bring it way the heck back up, mostly because when my head gets in the details, I forget my luggage. But and I know, Talal, you're probably jammed up there, but at some point I'm going to want to ask you a question a little bit off script.
Go for it.
Because, when you think about what it takes to enable technology into Oman, I'd love to get a bit of a sense outside of our Alberta, and I'm sorry to go off script on this, but I would love. I'll ask you that question a bit later on, because we have different drivers in our jurisdiction than you might have. But to get a bit of a sense of what some of the drivers are to get technology in and deployed, there's different challenges for different folks. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, on the policy perspective, it's interesting in the sense, I think it gets back to that kind of vision and mission piece. And I think that that's where the government's sort of falling down in a lot of regards, is actually not delivering what that vision and mission should sort of look like. You actually think about it, like, the amount of money the Americans put into the Apollo program was something like only $250 billion by 2023 inflationary numbers. Like, put that in perspective. Like if we wanted to go to Mars now, it wouldn't cost $223 billion. But what they actually really effectively did was create a mission and a vision now that would sort of get there. It was less than 2% of U.S. GDP at the time. And we're talking about a 10% hit to GDP or a 7% hit to GDP with our current climate policies. I think that uniting around this sort of common vision and a common is frankly a really difficult thing to do when you're operating in a world of sound bites. But that to me is the piece I think that is going to potentially drive a smarter policy framework that actually allows us to get to the scale and the timing that we actually need, is for real political leadership to demonstrate what that vision and mission looks like, and then let the other pieces fall in place, because I promise this should be less expensive than going to the moon when we have no idea how to do it.
Could be a little controversial, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So to be a little bit controversial, I would almost see it the opposite. I do agree we need a vision and things like that, but I think we're good at vision and ideology now. Like we know where we're trying to go, and we know what it's happened or what the goals are. I see the problem as we're not doing action, and we're trying to start from the end and not from the beginning. So what I'm quite concerned with is we should be doing everything to take good steps in the right direction, and then as soon as you've made that step, then take another step in the right direction. And in my mind, you can't do that from calculating backwards from 2050 and trying to guess what 2050 looks like and have it define all of your steps. You need to look at where you're at and say, here's where I'm at, here's my next low-hanging fruit. I want to be at least 30% better than I was yesterday, and take a step that does that. And then as soon as you take that step, then look again and take another step and get 30% better and 30% better and 30% better. And then we do all the big stuff, and we do all the big stuff really fast, instead of kind of waiting and dealing with here's 2050 and what might it look like, and nobody does anything because they might not think that natural gas is the right solution or hydrogen is the right solution. We spend all of our time arguing. Just do the right stuff. Reduce emissions, take big steps in the right direction from where you are today, and continue to do that, and we'll have gone somewhere, and it'll be quite incredible.
I really agree with Scott, I guess. It's because many of us, what we do, we aim. And then when it comes to fire the shot, then we have only one chance because we have been waiting. The best option is exactly what Scott is saying. You start shooting, and then you start correcting towards the right place. So, yeah.
Can I bring Talal into this because I got his attention?
Yeah, I'm going to throw you a bone here because
Okay.
I had a question here about whether or not there was a secret sauce that we had in Canada that enabled all this, or if there's things that we should be sharing with other countries, or if there are other countries that we should be looking to for shining examples of other things that we can incorporate. So,
well, good one,
There you go.
Tim. That's great, and it touches on collaboration, and it touches on how we enable innovation, how we ultimately get some of our technologies that go through the system. How do we get them not just deployed locally, but then how do we get them to other parts of the world? Well, we do that through certain partnerships. Like Talal is for folks that don't know Talal, he's an absolute beauty, first of all, but a partner of ours with Carbon Connect International, located in Oman. So I did want to maybe just ask you, like, what does it take to get technology into the field? Are there different barriers that you deal with to get clean tech deployed in a meaningful way?
Thank you, Jackson, and thank you very much for that session. I will share one example. In the whole GCC, there is a momentum for decarbonizations. However, there is a vision, and they just started the baseline. But the de-risking activities, there is lots of cloud and ambiguity around it. I share one example. When we talk about methanes, I know that the Alberta and the Canadian sectors has really advanced into that domains, where they already mapped a deployment, as mentioned by Scott and the teams, as well, when John mentioned the collaboration with the SMEs. So the de-risking element in the whole GCC, where especially in the Middle East, if you look to Oman, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, I see there is no yet clarity about how they de-risk a technology, especially when it comes to zero venting applications. We've been working closely with General Magnetics from Alberta's. The carbon-based lines, the GHG accountings in a way where it is on the industrial standard rather than to be like in consulting's standards. I think that's something will help to de-risking. One of the potential where I see it, it is the decarbonization of rigs was mentioned by Scott. Phasing out diesel generator. There are lots of off-grid facilities where they are consuming diesel, which is lots of high emission. Having those hybrid approach with the battery storage. I spent time on Base River in Alberta and spent time on in-situ sand with that times with unconventional gas. And I've seen the action has been translated into a deployment. I think this is the time now to scale it up to international markets. Having a joint funds will help to accelerate technology growth, as well having an impact from best practices we have seen it. That's my assessment. Thank you, Jackson, for that.
So there's a joint fund aspect to that, so kind of shared funding, help scale up that technology, get it beyond just Canada's borders. In terms of the knowledge sharing, and we're going to make the panel now all about you, but from a knowledge sharing perspective, are you the one that is going out and actively seeking that knowledge to bring it in? And is there a way that we can better facilitate the connection?
Yes, indeed. I will share with you examples. In 2016, we started looking for GIBs, joint industrial projects in universities, and one of them was University of Alberta, University of Calgary. Currently, there is 4 funds funding those GIBs at the research consortiums, especially focusing on hydrogen, CCUS. And I've seen the industry in the region, GCCs, has been benefited a lot. However, GIBs can take you to a milestone, then you have to scale it up with the industrial deployment, because GIBs is a research projects. Then this is the other bush where we find GIBs is a good starting point for joint fund. I think now what we have seen it, we see lots of common ground for joint fund. If you look at is Abicorp, it is a GCC joint fund where they are financing methane emissions reduction project, helping the operators to establish faster decarbonization through that joint fund. Those are one of the mechanisms, but we are keen and to explore options as well.
Well, same question for the rest of the panel. Do we have a secret sauce?
So hopefully I think the secret sauce is going to be a whole mixture of different knowledge from all sorts of different places in the world. And when we're talking about climate, we're all under one atmosphere, so probably we should all do it together.
Okay, so we'll give you, you can respond to that one. We're going to lose Kevin in 10 minutes, so I've got one more question. We're going to do a little pass the mic. So go ahead and address this one, and then I've got one more question for the group.
So the secret sauce to me is building an innovation ecosystem. The secret sauce is about collaboration. And then you start, of course, innovation ecosystem with a vision. Then you go develop goals. And then you move on different elements of that innovation ecosystem. Networking would be the first one, to connect people, projects, ideas, etc. And moved on in terms of the applied research element on the TRL, areas for technology development, commercialization, deployment, etc. The challenge of collaborating internationally is that, and this is actually a challenge of collaboration, is to bring people from diverse groups with different vision, different goals, different what they really are trying to strive together, and then ask them to work together. You gotta create that the way that people are going to be saying, okay, we agree with that vision, or we are part of that vision, we are working on those goals, and then we are trying to achieve those goals. When we are doing it in Canada, is much simpler because people are coming from the same cultures, same background, etc. You can achieve those much easier. When you start expanding it to international, now you are dealing with different cultures, different perspectives, different values, different principles, so that becomes more difficult. Having said that, this is what PTAC has done. We have been herding cats, herding tigers, and brought them together in a really large way to work together. As I said, our innovation ecosystem is like 200 companies, we have 250 people, etc. So, and we are working with people in Aberdeen, with people in the US, with many other countries as well. And actually, I would like to invite Oman to also join our work together as well. Thanks.
So, because we're going to lose Kevin, I do want everybody to get a chance to answer this, and then afterwards we can make a call on whether or not we've asked all the questions we want answers to. But I want everybody's perspective on what's next. What's the next thing that we have to do in Canada to keep developing that technology, keep driving down those emissions? So what's next for us?
Commercialization and scaling is the sole answer. Even going back to the pure sort of energy technologies days where it was about top drives and long reach horizontal drilling, we had a terrible time. We come up with all these fantastic companies and sell them to Americans. We need to think about how we get a lot better at commercialization and scaling. Full stop.
Yeah, and that includes commercialization and scaling domestically as well as internationally. I think the opportunity in front of the clean tech providers, certainly that come out of the system in Canada, is there is an opportunity to hit these other markets, and it's just finding the right avenues into these other markets, because that will certainly improve the scaling on a more rapid scale.
Simply on each areas, be it CCUS, methane, whatever, all we need to identify the next steps. Like in methane, we have identified 6 sources that we don't have good technologies, and we are working on that. The other thing that I would say that we really need to do is expand our outreach to include international. Methane is a global challenge, requires global collaboration. If we all work together, we can make it happen.
I think I'm going to agree with the panel on commercialization and scale, and that we should learn from things that we've done. I'm falling back to the same example, but the compliance offset market in Alberta did that. Like it got rid of all the high bleed pneumatics and that turned into low bleed. And people would say, well, that was probably a bad idea because we should have gone zero bleed. If we had today's site, we probably should have gone zero bleed right from the get-go. But we made a great big step in the right direction, and it pulled out megatons of emissions, and we shouldn't be upset that the first step wasn't the perfect step. So now we take it in a second one. So now we go from, okay, we got the low bleed pneumatics, we solved 90% of the problem, we've only got 10% left to go fix. Now let's go fix that. But those programs really caused us to commercialize and scale. So everyone went and replaced all their high bleed pneumatics to low bleed pneumatics, and we did it really fast, and it made a big meaningful difference. So now take those learnings. That type of system really drove commercialization and scale. It drove innovation. It drove a lot of things. Now let's start putting it to the other parts of our business, the CO2 and not just the methane piece as well. So I would say that's the way out into the future from my perspective.
Got to agree with the panel. So that you covered emissions, I would say the other piece is just the whole idea of more talent creation and retention into Canada. The more we can grow our clean tech companies, keep them here in Canada, have them attract investment to Canada, have them attract talent to Canada, keep our talent growing in Canada is where we see scaling and commercialization of our clean techs startups to go.
Great. Well, okay, we'll call it there. Thanks all of you for your time. next year. Oh, any questions?
Does anyone have any
before-
questions?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So, Msalem Al-Harthi from Oman. First of all, to be honest, I'm so impressed what Canada has been done, and especially I've had more than once regarding the vision and the goal, and that one, trust me, it's the most difficult part to do in any country, and especially with us, and maybe Talal can agree on that. Okay, so congratulations, and we would like you, honestly, we'd like you to share with us that kind of knowledge. More than methane reduction, if we can manage to get the vision and the goal, it will be excellent in terms of emission reduction. I don't know if we still have more time, but you talked about the butane recovery, butamine. Can you tell us more about it? Sorry, you know, it's my background, I can't help.
Yes, I mentioned bitumen. So bitumen is essentially what we have in Canada. It's extremely heavy oil. Like if you put bitumen in a jar and then you kind of put it, nothing moves. Okay, it's like thicker than peanut butter, for example. So what we have done, we have actually one of the largest global reserves of bitumen. That's why Canada is now number either 3 or 4 when it comes to reserves that we have on oil. So for recovery of those, we use essentially heat it up. Essentially, there is what is called SAGD process. It's a horizontal well on in situ where you drill 2 wells, vertical 2 horizontal wells, 1 producers, 1 injectors, and then you inject steam in that, and then you recover bitumen. And then when you recover it, you take it essentially to bitumen conversion to exactly synthetic the fuel, etc., for use.
I believe that's in a refinery.
Right.
Yeah, so if I have already a refinery built, can I do this kind of modification on it?
So first it goes to what we call upgrader, right? And then the upgrader goes to refinery. So we essentially, with the upgrader, we create a synthetic crude oil, and then we would just make it to gasoline and everything else. But there are some technologies that we were just talking at the previous session. John Zaw, who is the leader in Alberta, innovates. They are pursuing conversion of bitumen directly to products that then you don't generate any greenhouse gas emissions.
Because I'm from a refinery.
Right.
So I know now maybe due to the time constraint, so I'd like to...
Would be more than happy after this session to get together and then discuss this.
Any other questions? No? Okay. So I was going to say, next year at COP29, we have to have the same panel, but we're going to drop in people from other countries in between each of you. So we'll have a bit more of a mix and flavor from best practices globally. So CRIN, committing you to do that next year as well. Okay, it's going to be awesome, but we'll be there to facilitate and participate.
I thought you would say by next year we'll have 50% carbon.
Well, we could, you know what? You're welcome to join the panel next year. You can share your stories. Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
Okay, I gotta